I fluctuate. I know the one thing they tell you is to keep a consistent sleep schedule, but I'm kind of all over the map. Some nights I'll stay up late, but I like a 1 a.m. bedtime. Sounds good. It sounds like a good goal for me.
Because you get a little bit of the night.
Yeah, you get a little taste.
Going too early.
You get a little taste of the witching hour, and then you conk out. And yeah, I don't like to sleep. I hate waking up at like afternoon. I always feel like I've ruined my life. Like, what am I doing? Guilt and shame are big motivating factors for me. Not
just ruin the day, but ruin your life.
Oh God, life's over. I mean, I might as well pack it in. That's what I say. But you're 7 hours ahead. You're in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm in Scotland. So I think we're 8 ahead. It's about 6 p.m. here.
Where in Scotland are you?
Up in the north at the moment in Aberdeenshire.
Oh,
usually
beautiful.
In Glasgow, and looking for a place again there right now, but back up in the north for the moment.
Nice. It's so beautiful there.
It is. It's a beautiful sunny day today as well, and I went out walking. Kind of got a little bit lost, to be honest. Ended up in a field with some sheep, but
wow. You're like Alan Partridge.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Are you a big Partridge fan?
I would say I love Alan Partridge deeply.
I was never sure if that humor would kind of translate across the pond. Is he big over there, or is it more of a cult thing?
He's not big, but those who know like that character over here are, completists. Like if once you get your hooks in, it's deep love. And I feel like, I wonder if it's as funny for people over there that it is for us, because so much of it is just, I mean, there's so much that's brilliant about that character, but it also it's also sort of, there's an exoticism to the slang and the accent, of course. Like, it feels very, I don't know, it all feels baked into what's funny about it. But I can't imagine. I'm trying to think of like a Canadian, if I was watching a Canadian thing, I think the Canadian accent might be a deterrent. It might be like, make the material less funny than more. So I've always wondered if I'm getting something even more out of it, out of the Alan Partridge character, than someone from, Norwich or whatever.
How come you think the Canadian accent wouldn't quite work?
Well, I don't want to get myself in trouble with my fellow Canadians, but I've lived in the US for 14 years, and I just feel I can really hear it now. I can really hear that Canadian accent, and I don't know. It's funny to me. It's a funny accent. It's kind of mellifluous. It has this like musical sort of lilt, kind of like Swedish, I guess. But I've been outside of it for so long that I can kind of hear it more clearly than I obviously could when I was living in Canada. And it's just, sometimes I think it's kind of goofy sounding. I don't know.
I quite like a Malcolm Gladwell or someone, his kind of accent.
Yeah, because he's Canadian, right?
Yeah. It's quite broad though. It feels like it's a little bit strong.
I feel like he's a product of, just having probably lived in the US for years. He's a man of the world, I suppose. So he's got a global accent, let's say.
Speaking of Partridge a moment ago, did you ever get into like Monty Python or anything as well?
I did as a kid. I had a little moment. I never went deep into it, but as a child, I was really into Red Dwarf and I was really into Fawlty Towers, which was my entry point, I think, into Monty Python because of John Cleese. But there was a few things like Red Dwarf and Fawlty Towers and a little bit of Monty Python, more of the movies and stuff when I was, like 10 or something. But loved that stuff.
Do you see that humor shining through in Penguins at all, do you think?
I do, kind of. I mean, I feel like that's all in there. It's like in the soup. Yeah, do you?
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
Okay, fun. Yeah, interesting.
That kind of idea, where the character, something awful always happens to them, that feels like very British humor.
Good. Yeah. Thanks. I like that. It is. I mean, it is something that I'm very tickled by. Just this endless suffering I find so funny.
I mean, it's interesting as well, because with Penguins, you're communicating, whether it be suffering or just these kind of stories and ideas without any words. Can you learn anything from that carries back into your music, communicating without language?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was just at a period in my life when I decided to make that book that I wanted to just not use words. I was tired of songwriting. I felt like I didn't have much to say. I didn't have much else to say in that regard. And I wanted to do as 180 a turn as I could, singing songs with lyrics to telling, visual stories like cartoons or comic book without words. So I wanted to just go as far away from songwriting as I could, but I definitely think there's things that having done that, I can now reintroduce to the music. And I think music can obviously tell a story without words. One of my favorite groups has Penguin in the title, Penguin Cafe Orchestra, a great group from the UK from the beginning in the 70s. And they were like a chamber kind of experimental ensemble that, can get very emotional just using music without lyrics. So I think it's possible.
What was the deal with them again? Because didn't the guy die in the 90s, but then they've had more records come out since?
I believe his son took over, but yeah, his Simon Jeffries was the main architect of that band, and he passed, I think in the 90s. The whole concept of the group came to him in a dream. He was playing at a cafe populated by penguins. So he was trying to honor that dream or experience that dream, which is nice.
I like that image for like a short film or something.
Yeah, it feels very, very dreamlike.
I mean, it's interesting as well, we're kind of touching upon film and TV a little bit at the start of this, because I'm currently in the middle of watching Girls for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm on about season 4, and I saw your album cover and kind of did a double take of sorts and looked a little bit closer, because it's Alex Karpovsky.
Yeah, it is.
Who's in Girls. He's one of the main cast. What's the kind of story there? How did that come about?
That's a funny... I think I was watching Girls too, and I think I stopped it around season 4. He had moved to LA. I think at one point we had dated the same girl, and there was a little bit of friction. I think he had dated her first. And so there was a little bit of like, maybe there was even some overlap. I don't know, but there was a little bit of conflict. I think we were kind of mild enemies for a short time, but before we really knew each other. And he moved to LA from New York. This was years ago now, like 7 years ago. I play basketball, like a weekly basketball game. We were at the time we're playing at Hollywood High, which is this like kind of institution right in the center of Hollywood. It's this high school which has a gym, which we would rent out. And Alex started to join the games. And it was fun. It was a fun game, but it was always, when he started showing up, it was like, oh God, this guy's here. Like, I got to guard this guy. And for years, it was quite awkward. But then we just kind of, I think we ran into each other at a party, and we'd known each other from basketball, but we'd never really spoken. And we got to talking, and the conversation flowed really nicely, and we just kind of hit it off immediately, and kind of became quite fast friends. And for years, just had a really good friendship. And then it came, when I came time to make this record, I knew I wanted to do this cover that was this album cover that kind of told us a little mini story in miniature on the cover. I wanted to have it feel like a still from a film, like The Long Goodbye or something like that, where you just see the poster and oh, this character is on a journey here, and we've just caught him right in the middle. and also referencing some of my, some of the greatest album covers of all time, specifically by the collective Hypnosis that did all the, the classic Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin covers. And Sparks had an album cover called Propaganda, which I really loved. I mean, all of the Sparks albums, like really with the brothers on them, really felt like you were in the middle of watching like a film. So I wanted to create this scenario where we've got this character in the desert, and he's lost, and he's got a map, and he's the album is called Islomania. So the irony is that this character who has a love of islands, presumably also a love of the water, which is what islands are surrounded by. But here he is lost in the desert, and he's in a parachute. So he's missed his landing quite significantly. So I knew I wanted that image, that story to be told. We have a before. We knew he came from the sky with the parachute, and we hopefully have an after where he finds his way. So then it was just, well, who do I get to be that person? Putting myself there, it's just a little too much. I'm already in the songs, I don't think I need to put myself also on the cover. So I wanted to cast it. And Alex has such a great face, and he's such a good actor. I thought, well, if he can convey this just in one single frame, then I think it's a success. And I think he did quite nice. And we drove up to Death Valley and hiked out to this insane sand dunes, just kind of snapped it off in this incredible heat. It was quite wild, but I think he did such a great job, and such a, simple execution, but I think we did it. I'm very happy with that cover.
Death Valley's the hottest place in the world, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah, we waited until, I think it was early October, because a month before it was the hottest it had ever been on planet Earth, ever recorded. So we were like, are we really going to go out there? And he's in a full suit and he's dragging this parachute. So it wasn't like, there was some danger, it wasn't without its risks, but.
Well, I think I saw a few of the shots from that shoot where you're shooting in front, is it like a burning bush or something? Does stuff just catch fire because it's so hot?
No, we were on our drive up there. So it was the photographer, Jason Tippett, and myself and Alex. It was a small crew. The budget was small, so we did it quite lean. But we were driving up to Death Valley from Los Angeles, and we passed a giant fire on the side of the highway. And so we said, hey, maybe that's the cover. Like maybe that's the airplane that crashed. So we find this like plume of smoke, and we situate you in front of it, and it looks like your plane has crashed and you're walking through, because there was still up near there was still desert. It wasn't the same kind of desert. It was more the brambly, tumbleweed and like flat, dry earth, sort of desert. But so we did that, and it was like a controlled burn. It was something that these forest sort of, well, it was not really a forest, but these fire places like do these controlled burns to keep things safe in really dry conditions. So we got really close to this smoke, this like fire, and the one of the rangers or whatever came up on us and was like yelling at us like, this is private property, we're gonna arrest you if you don't leave right away. And so we did manage to get a shot, but we couldn't get we would have gotten even closer if we could have, but we had to get out of there. And it was a fine shot, but really the money shot was in the dunes. So we were just experimenting.
It's interesting what you were saying as well about how you kind of know the story that's happened before this shot, and you imagine there would be an after too. Would you ever look to create some continuity? Because I know you've spoken that this album is kind of part of a trilogy in your mind. Would you ever look to maybe continue it in future? The cover idea.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sequel in mind. I do think the third in the series, because I'm now I've been writing for the third album. I have some demos and stuff. I feel like it's going to constantly change because it's going to be a while before that third record comes out. So songs will come and go. But for the second album, it's all pretty much allocated. All the songs are allocated, and I didn't think that specifically, but it's a good it's a good idea to bring. He is kind of now, Alex, inadvertently, if he would do the second cover in some way, it would create like a really nice narrative, and it would be nice. I don't know if he's going to want to do it. I think it was a novelty for him to be on, and he'd never been on an album cover. So I was like, that sounds fun. I don't know if he's going to want to do it again. The second album is called "And That's Why Dolphins Lost Their Legs." So it has an oceanic sort of theme, but it's much bleaker. It's like a very dark, sour record. So, the idea that dolphins used to walk around on Earth and then realized how much it sucked. So they evolutioned out their legs and went back in the water.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons when the dolphins take over the town.
Right. Forgot about that. Yeah.
You can always pull it back to The Simpsons.
Yeah, it's true.
I think this was in the podcast because you did that kind of double two-part podcast. Was it was the same name as the album, right?
Yes.
Kind of looking at the discography of the group so far before kind of pushing on with this one. And you spoke a little bit in that about how you felt like Arm's Way was a direct reaction to Return to the Sea because that kind of boxed you in a little bit. What was your headspace going into this new album? Was it a similar thing? Were you framing it in the context of what had come before, or where were you at?
Well, I think because I had this 5-year space, I think I didn't really need to have any counter feeling. It was just, it felt fresh. It felt like I was starting fresh. So it wasn't this record wasn't in reaction to any that came before it. I think it was really just in reaction to my attitude over the past few years when I wasn't writing music, when I'd spent probably 2 or 3 years without writing a single song, which is I'm in normal times, I'm always, it's a constant flow where I'm always writing, whether those songs evolve enough to the point where they're considered for the record. But there's always like a steady stream of ideas. So there was a few years when I wasn't writing. So I think it was really just the idea for this record was just to embrace the craft of it.
When you say you weren't writing at all for 2 years or so, were you drawing every day or writing other things every day in place of that?
For that year that I was making the book, I was drawing every day, or most days. That was kind of the main project. And I was trying other things. I was writing script stuff. I live in LA, so eventually you do catch the bug, the Hollywood bug. So, and I'd gone to film school years before, so I was like, oh, I kind of want to re-engage with this, because I've always had that desire to make a movie. And so I'd been writing a little bit and was working on I had a film in Canada that was being set up, and I'd had some money and was casting it and had all of these things. And then, it's a very tricky thing making a film. So I was a bit short on money and couldn't get over the finish line with it. And then COVID hit and it was kind of killed it. But, maybe it's not dead. I don't know. But that's still something I'm interested in doing at some point. But yeah, music came a calling, and I just came, the ideas started to seep back in, and I started up again with it.
You used to want to be an editor, right? That was kind of your way into filmmaking.
Yeah. Where did I say that somewhere? Did I say that on the podcast?
That was where you went to film school, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, it's interesting because when you look at this album you've just put out in context of the other ones, and it's kind of been a progression throughout all of them, but it feels like you've learned to say both musically and lyrically it's still achieving the same emotional impact but in less time or less words, and it's kind of just condensing it a little bit. How has your editing process changed musically over the course of the records and into this one?
I think I was revising a lot. I was sort of employing the skills through writing. When I was writing, I'd sold a pilot script to this production company for like a half-hour comedy kind of thing. And, I sent them the draft and I would get notes and I'd have to edit and do another pass and figure out like the arc of this character and the arc of the show. And I had to think about all of these things and constantly refine and just improve on this every aspect of it. And songwriting is this very like mysterious, ephemeral kind of process where, for me at least, where I'm not using technique. I'm just sort of using intuition as a way to guide me through it. And I think with this record, it was fun because I was a little more judicious about what I would do, what words I would use, how I would create the song structure. I was a little more intentional. I think I was trying to make, not trying, I set out to sort of make I don't want to say a pop record, but as much of a, look, it's hard for me to talk about my own work, especially when it's so new. But I was trying something, and trying is usually the first step to failure. I think as soon as you try too hard, you fail. But yes, I was more conscious of the editing process with this record. I was like fine-tuning things. I wanted to make a perfect record. I'd been gone for 5 years, and I knew that I could do this a little slower and a little more deliberately than I'd ever done before because I had no timeline. No one was expecting a record. There wasn't a deadline. There wasn't a label when I was making this record. It was before Royal Mountain had stepped in to do it. So I was doing this kind of piecemeal. I was doing a song here at the studio, a song there at that studio, and just kind of slowly whittling away. So it was a new process, and it was enjoyable. I think it was I'd like to be able to go back to the process I usually do, which is, go into a studio for 3 weeks and you kind of bang out a record. But I didn't want those constrictions. I wanted to try something new. I liken it to George Costanza in Seinfeld, who decides to do the opposite of every instinct that he's ever had to finally succeed for once in his life. And it works. He does every instinct. He just goes in the opposite direction. And so I decided to do that with this record. I was like, I want to make something and I'm going to do the opposite of what I've done before and just see how it goes. So that was the goal.
I like that analogy, the summer of George.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get it.
How when you're talking about kind of nipping in and out of various studios there when you're constructing it, how much of this was done in the city of Quartz and how much of it was done, what were the other studios you were kind of using? It
was almost exclusively here in the city of Quartz, Los Angeles, Lipstick City. The first song I went in before I was even sure if it was going to be an Islands record or if it was going to be a solo thing or what. I brought in closed captioning, a demo of it, to Chris Cody, this producer who produces 2 songs on the record. I'd worked with him a decade before, so I was like, well, maybe I'll, 10 years later, maybe I'll bring him this song. So I went in. He had a room at Sunset Sound, which is like a very venerated, a legendary venue or a studio in Los Angeles, where many
Tom Petty did stuff there, didn't he?
Yeah, I sang into the microphone that he sang. I think it was Full Moon Fever. He sang into this Neumann microphone that I sang into as well. And so you're kind of paying for that history, I think, when you go in there. And, we used Prince's reverb that he used for Purple Rain. It was like a very, you feel like you're in the halls of greatness. So it kind of pumps you up. My 2 Islands members were in Canada, Geordie and Evan, the brothers. They were up in Canada. Geordie was on tour with another band that he plays in, US Girls. And so he came in and played bass on closed captioning. Mike from Rat-a-Tat was in town. And so he's got a new band called Kunzite, and they were doing some recording. So he came in and played guitar on that song. And and Adam lives in town, the drummer, so he was drumming. And so when Mike came in, I was kind of telling him, like, he was asking, like, what is this? I was like, well, it's this, I don't know, I think it's a new Islands record. I'm not quite sure, maybe a solo record, but it's quite, it's expensive being at Sunset Sound. I don't know how much longer I can do this for. I'm just doing one song and it's already like the budget that I, spent on the last record, basically. So he was like, well, why don't you come up to the Catskills in upstate New York to my place? I have a studio. So I did. I flew to New York and took the bus up to the Catskills and made the Passionate Age. I brought that demo to him and he just did his wizardry on that. And so that was the only out of state song that we recorded, but it got the blood flowing a little bit, then now I had 2 songs together for this record and it was kind of starting to put the pieces together. And I went back to LA, made a plan, got together with this producer, Patrick Ford, this friend of mine in LA, and started to piece all of the rest of the album together. Said, okay, I'm making an album. Like, I have these 2 songs and now we're going to do a session. And then I kept writing and doing more, cut 2 more sessions after that. So I wanted to have it be this drawn out process where I had a time to say, okay, this song, there were a couple songs we recorded. It's like, okay, these songs are not appropriate for this record. So they're not going to, go. There's probably 4 or 5 other songs that have more of had a different feel once I started to piece together the concept of the record. So.
How do you decide that those first 2 are going to be the ones that you pin down first and use to kind of be the signpost for where the record's going to go? Well,
they sort of dictated, when I made A Passionate Age, I went home and I was like, that was so good and fun. I want to write another song in that. I want to keep that party going. I want to keep whatever that feeling is. I want to keep that alive. So I wrote Islomania, the title song. And that was, I wanted that kind of slightly French sound, like the French touch kind of sound, which Passionate Age kind of references. I wanted to kind of explore that a little further in my own, filtered through my own style or whatever. So then Islomania came out of that. And then, once that was, we're laying the cards on the table, you start to see the patterns emerge. So I just sort of followed that path, I guess.
Once you start to see those patterns emerge, how long does it take for you to kind of get a full grip on what this record is and what it's going to be?
Then we're off to the races. I think once I started to have that idea, you start to just follow. I would just go towards it. And that doesn't mean I didn't still record, go into the studio and record these other songs with the idea that, okay, maybe these aren't for this record, but I'm still going to follow. I'm going to do my due diligence and record them and see how they look. You kind of have to go the distance and have the songs recorded and open up the folder and look at them and listen to them and say, okay, do these flow? And maybe you don't need to do that either. I think one thing that people liked so much about the first Islands record is that I didn't care about any of that. The chaos of that first album is what people, I think, were drawn to, is that every song kind of went in a different genre direction. There was the more of a country sound, and then there was a kind of sort of our version of like a rap song, like a rap beat. Yeah. So there was all these different styles we were trying to like explore, and not concerned about any kind of consistency, which I don't think you should be too concerned. I think you need to just, I don't know. I think it just needs to feel good. I think that should be your main guiding light, I think, in anything is, does this feel good? And if it does, then who cares if it makes sense,
Yeah, it's just about trusting in the process, and you'll find your way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting as well. I think, was it Set the Fairlight? That was the last one you completed for the record, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When you say it's the last one that you finish. How clear an idea do you have? Is everything else fully in place, or is it just kind of a sketch of how it's going to finish up?
There might have been, everything was pretty much in place. I think I knew there was the 9 songs were allocated, if not mixed fully. No, they hadn't been mixed yet, but they'd been fully organized and set. So they hadn't been mixed, but they were the songs that they were going to be. And the sequence, maybe not the sequence, but the definitely the final songs. And it was one of those things where it was, and I feel like this happens a lot with people. I don't think I'm alone, but usually the last song can kind of be like the one last like burst of energy that gets you over the finish line. And the song just kind of came out of nowhere. And I wrote it really fast. I think I wrote it just in one sitting and knew immediately that it needed to be on this record. And so it was kind of the like 11th hour edition. And I wrote it and then I took it to Chris, and it was kind of full circle. I went back to Chris Cody's. He'd moved studios at this point. It was a year and a half. It was just over a year after we'd started the record. So a year had gone by, and we moved to his new studio, which was in Glendale, California. Just the two of us, and then brought in Adam, the drummer, and that was kind of that I knew then the bow was on the record. I knew that was the kind of final piece that was missing. I didn't know it until I'd written the song, but this song, this is what completes the thing. So then I knew we'd had it. We had the 10 songs, and we had a complete record.
Does it change the way you think about the other 9 in any way?
No, I think they all have their own different little journeys to getting completed. They really have their own life to them, I think. And this one fits in, and it's hard, I think, to go with different producers. There's different mixers on, Chris mixed that one, Chris Cody, and then John Congleton mixed most of the others. Mike Stroud mixed his own production, A Passionate Age. So there's a lot of competing voices and flavors and personalities. So it was a bit of a juggling act to sort of wrangle all of these voices, these creative voices, into one cohesive record. So it was a bit of it was a bit tricky, but I think we got there.
But then I guess if it's your one, singular creative voice at the heart of it, and that's where they're all originating from, I imagine that gives you a through line to kind of grab a hold of. Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, it's always going to be, I'm always going to be there. So I think that's what ties all of the records together. Every record I try to, I'd heard an interview recently that I love with this guy, maybe you've heard of him, Brian Eno. He was being interviewed by Rick Rubin.
Oh, is this some Broken Record?
Yeah. And he talks about, it's a wonderful interview. Brian Eno is one of my absolute heroes. And so I love him so much. But one of the things he talks about is, there are two kinds of artists. There are the pioneers, the frontiersmen, and then the farmers. And so, the idea, but that basically, if you're out on the land, tilling the soil, perfecting your song, or your style or your sound, revising and kind of creating the same thing again and again until you reach perfection, or you're the kind of artist that's going out and trying to discover new things and explore new ways of learning and seeing the world. And so I kind of feel like I straddle that a little bit, but I do feel like I like to go out into the world and find a new approach and discover new things and find new ways to make records or find new sounds to employ, I guess. So that's kind of what these records have been for me over the past 15 years. But yeah, like you said, the through line is me, I guess.
It feels like you've always been a little bit like that too, though? Because I mean, was it like the second Unicorns album or something you wanted to make it a board game?
Yes.
Or something like that? When you had that idea kind of floating around, there was still going to be another one of those records.
Yeah, you've done your research, my friend. Yeah, we were pranksters then too. Like that was definitely subverting expectations was the main objective with that band. And I think also because we were really not getting along, and I wonder if maybe I knew that getting back in the studio and making a record might have been too impossible a task. So it would have been funnier just to prank our fan base, which now I wouldn't do that. I think when you're 22, you can kind of have that sort of attitude, but it's more combative. I just like to be grateful and humbled.
Do you still see that combative attitude in yourself in any way?
In little moments it shines. I've got a glimmer of it left, but I've just been beaten down too much over the past 15 years. I've been humbled. So now I just mostly just happy to be where I am. I don't want to rock the boat too much.
That's what the music industry does to you.
It fucks you up. But I do need a little bit of that mischief to come back, because that's what life is, I think that's a big important part of living is fucking shit up, if you don't mind my cursing.
Go for it.
I do think that's a big part of, I think people want it. They want their boat to be rocked. I think, they need it and they respond to it. It's exciting. It's exhilarating. So I think, I think that the record after this follow-up record, the third record, is somewhat of a trilogy, but it's kind of on its own. It's going to be more of the boat rocking record. It's going to be more of the mischief record. You'll see. I
mean, I feel like calling a record, and that's where the Dolphins lost their legs, feels a little bit mischievous. There's a little bit,
yeah. I'm easing back into the ocean of troublemaking. So there is a little bit of that on the next record. It's definitely more playful. It's dark, but it's a little more it's more humorous, I would say. Yeah.
Dark in what way?
Dark in the way that in the depressed way, in the all is lost kind of way, I guess, feeling like I've grappled with depression, I suppose, so it's just kind of going towards that, the darkness. Yeah, the sadness.
How, when you're looking at that in your music, are you trying to find the light in it in some way, or are you just presenting it as it is?
It depends on the mood when I'm writing. Sometimes it's just a full embrace of the darkness, and sometimes it's, there's a joke in there just to soften it, a little gallows humor or whatever, but sometimes I'm trying to push against it. I think that's what Islomania is. It's, as the record, I think it's trying to push against the darkness and really find the light and the joy in all of this, and the gratitude in all of it. I can only occupy that space for so long before I go back to my little hole, my little cave, which is where I'm headed.
It can be empowering too, though. Like when you listen to Islomania, the fact that, there's some darker songs on there lyrically, and yet you turn them into these dancey, kind of punching the air bangers.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's always been something I've tried to do is take these dark, even since obviously the Unicorns, the first record was to have these like silly sounding, buoyant kind of little songs that sounded on their surface uplifting, but then when you listen, you hear how grim they were.
Is that ever reflected for you too in the writing process? Do you know how dark something is when you first write it, or is it only upon reflection that you notice?
I think so. I think I'm aware. I try to like just receive it and not be too conscious during the writing process. I wait for the critical part to come in, but I think I have some awareness of where it's headed tonally, as it's happening.
I wanted to ask a wee bit about Carpenter as well.
Yes.
Because I'm intrigued by when you came back to that song.
Yeah.
Where was your headspace at? Do you remember were you relating to it? What was your feelings on it when you first rediscovered that demo?
I don't fucking remember. And it's, I don't know if you're going to do an intro off the top that explains all this, or if we need to talk.
We probably need to explain a little bit, yeah.
Well,
I apologize for
it's
bringing it up.
No, you have to. You're doing your work. You're well researched, so I expect nothing less from you, Alex. Okay. So, like I said, I took 5 years off from doing the music stuff. I was doing other things. At some point in those years, I discovered a song by Julie Byrne called Prism Song. And though I don't remember this, clearly I was moved by the song. I sat down at my studio where I'm sitting right now. I picked up a guitar, plugged it in, and just very quickly ripped off, no pun intended, I was going to say ripped off like in the sense of like played a quick cover version of it. Just sang the verse, played the chords, maybe added a chord or two as well. Very like, I didn't know what the chords were necessarily, but I was like, oh, this minor sounds good. I don't know if she went to the minor. I'd only listened to the song once, but I was like, oh, there's something that I'm responding to, and it's kind of, I just want to feel that. I just want to feel what that feels like, because I hadn't written a song in a while, and I had no intention of it. So I recorded a little demo of it, closed the file on my computer, forgot about it for I don't know how long. I don't recall any of this, but years went by. And when I was starting to make Islomania, I was going through my folders on my computer of all the sketches and little things that I'd recorded, and dozens and dozens and dozens of stuff, like folders and folders of just little nuggets and ideas. And I see this one folder, and it's got a lot of megabytes. Like it looks like I went kind of big on this this session, so let me open it up. And I think it said Prism Song on it. I opened it up, I listened to it, I was like, whoa, this is so good. Like, what is this? I had no memory that it was a cover. No memory whatsoever. And I liked it. I even said in the initial press release for this song, I discovered it in this way, and it felt like I was singing someone else's song. It felt exciting. I was exhilarated by that. Turns out I was singing someone else's song, but I didn't know it at the time. So I finished, I wrote a second verse. I finished the song. I added an outro. I added a couple like instrumental bridges, and I brought it into the studio when it came time to record it. And we recorded it and mixed it and mastered it and, pressed it onto vinyl, released it into the world. And 3 days after the record came out, someone on Twitter was like, that's a cover. That's not there's a reason why you said in the press release that it feels like you're singing someone else's song. And it was like being in a bad dream. I mean, I still feel like I'm in a bad dream. It doesn't feel real to me. It doesn't make sense to me that this could have happened. I was completely mortified, and I have no answer for how that could have happened, how that could have slipped me by, other than that, I have a terrible memory. But also that when songwriting takes place, I don't remember anything when I'm writing a song. Anytime someone's like, well, what is this song about? I honestly have to re-excavate, listen to the song again and say, oh, what was I going for here? So much of the writing process for me is, it sounds a little precious to say, but there is a kind of trance that I go into when I'm writing. I'm not consciously working through stuff. I'm not a technical writer. I taught myself how to play music, so I don't have sheets in front of me. It's not schematics. It's not structured that way. It's all feeling. So I just assumed that it was one of many in the pile, and I didn't recall. But I was like, well, my dad was a carpenter, so I must have been writing about my dad. It's mortifying that it got that far. Second I discovered it, I reached out to my publishing person, contacted Julie Byrne's people, made it clear that 100% of the publishing on the song was being, was hers. And it's now just a cover song, but it was a very, very awkward way to get there. And as a cover song, I think it's quite good. I really do. I'm proud of it as a cover song. As a Nick Thorburn original, I think it's absolute dog shit, but it's just how it goes.
It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I can't think of any other situation where this happened. Although I heard a story about Lolita once, that Nabokov, I think he had a professor as a young man, and wrote, who'd written this exact story, and then years later, subconsciously he'd stolen it very specifically. So there is a thing about, George Harrison and My Sweet Lord with the chiffons, He's So Fine. There are these things where it creeps into your subconscious. This was one more level up. This was, I documented this, someone else's idea, and then forgot that it was someone else's idea. So it's a very embarrassing situation, but it is historic. I mean, I don't think I've never seen another example of this happening. I hate to be a pioneer in that way, but...
I mean, it's funny because I was reading an interview with you where you spoke about sometimes when you look back on old records, it feels as if like you were examining another person's work. It almost ties into that a little bit. And it's this idea that we very quickly become separating a different person from who created music that, you maybe only made a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was in a bit of a dark place too, during that period. I was going through things where I was not wanting to be too checked into reality. So I think I was already kind of checked out. But writing is this sort of checked out process. I think it's the way you can let ideas in, is to put your guard down. And I think creative people do understand that. And I've received sympathy for what happened. I think it's not that I'm deserving of sympathy. I made a mistake.
It was an honest mistake.
It truly was. I swear on my life, it was an honest mistake. It was just so public, it was just such a public, and I have this, I feel like I have this thing that's stuck with me, and I hope it becomes just more of a funny footnote, and people can see that there are albums and albums of songs that are mine, and I love the idea of, I've talked about it before too, of quoting other music. I think songs, especially pop songs, there are references all throughout history. You can hear, every day you can hear. I weirdly just heard the weirdest thing I heard yesterday. I was listening to this Psychic TV song, White Nights, and, Genesis Pjorge's early band, or not early band, but post-throbbing gristle. And I was listening along to it. I was like, that's a good melody. Wait, that's Kokomo by the Beach Boys. But, Psychic TV came first. So did Mike Love, I think Mike Love wrote Kokomo. Did Mike Love rip off Genesis Pjorge? It sounds like the same song, but I think the answer is no. I think there's a swirl of combinations of melodies and progressions and stuff, but it's just, you can see these examples all over the place where writers after the fact have to give their publishing to someone that came before them, Sam Smith and Tom Petty and the Strokes and Billy Idol or whatever. So this happens all the time, but not quite as extreme as mine. I've never seen this happen so much. So yeah,
it almost feels evocative of something that you might see happening in Penguins. It's a similar kind of a funniness to it, except in Penguins you would get eaten by a shark or something.
I feel like I did get eaten by a shark in a way. Yeah, but he spit me out because I tasted like shit.
Speaking of getting eaten by sharks, I wanted to ask about Gore. because it's this kind of, it's the final song on the album, and it almost feels like something that would play as the credits roll. It's got that sense of cinematic finality to it. What did that start with, and how did it kind of form and become what it is now?
I don't know. I mean, the honest answer is, like most of these songs, I'll be in a flurry of writing and I'll be feeling something and I let it go, you know? So I don't know what I was at, you know, what place I was at when I was writing it. But I very quickly knew it was going to be the album closer. It sort of hints towards something a little darker, I think, obviously.
What's to come?
What's to come. Yeah. I do like when the last album on, the last song on an album sort of gestures towards, sort of an ellipsis towards what's coming after it. And Gore is definitely in that world. It's definitely the darkest song on the record. It's very cynical and angry and vaguely political too, I guess. Just to, you know, I mean, I don't want to explain its meaning too much lyrically, but I think it's all kind of, it's not that obtuse. I think you can interpret it pretty easily. But I don't know. I think I just wanted there to be this wall, just this like kind of wall of sound that just sort of hit you at the end after you had this nice sunny beach time. There's a consequence to all that. Maybe
that mischievous side coming through again. Just to kind of trip us up, because we did, just to add something into the mix that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, and especially at the end, you know, lull you into this place of contentment and then pull the rug out from under you.
It's interesting what you were saying at the start of that too, about how you're not quite sure how it developed. And it's interesting to think about this too, and what we were just saying about Carpenter. Does it ever feel like the songs already exist and you're kind of just catching them and kind of just pulling them from the air, as opposed to writing them and they're coming out of you?
Totally. I mean, that's a big part of writing, is feeling like, especially when the songs are good and when they come fast. Set the Fairlight was an example too, where the chords just started to come and the melody was there, and it was like, is this mine? And now, of course, I have to be careful when I say that, because I had that exact thing happen. As far as I know, these songs are all mine, minus Carpenter. But that's why it's so confusing, because it is that same feeling that you get when you're in the moment, when you're in it, when you're striking iron, you know, it really feels like you're receiving it more than you're creating it. And, you know, Paul McCartney had that famous example with Yesterday, where I think he had the song, it came to him in a dream, very completed. And I've had songs come to me in dreams too. Not to compare myself to Sir McCartney. But he woke up with Yesterday in his head, fully realized. And he went around to everybody. I mean, maybe everybody knows this story and it's boring to repeat it, but he went around to every friend he had and sang it to them and said, "What is this song? Like, I think it's a song from my childhood." He was convinced that it was an old song from his youth, and no one had heard it. He went around to everybody and no one could identify it. So he said, "Okay, I guess it's my song." I think even to this day is not entirely sure that it is.
That's what I'm just thinking. I wonder if it'd be fascinating, you know, say in 50 years, once everything's been completely digitized, we uncovered a song from like the 1930s or 40s that had the same melody.
Yeah. And I mean, the melodies get copied and borrowed and quoted all the time. I mean, you could turn on the radio and isolate a melody and see where its origins lie. And sometimes that's completely subconscious. Music is always playing throughout the day. We're always hearing it everywhere we go. You know, there was a thing with Steve Vai and Coldplay. There was a Coldplay song that Steve Vai, I think it was Steve Vai or Steve Satriani. I always get those two guys mixed up. But there was something,
Vai, I think.
Yeah. Do you know this story? He was convinced that they'd ripped off this melody, and it is very similar. And they denied it. They're like, "We've never heard this song before." But you can't really say that you've never heard a song before. You could easily be walking into a grocery store or pharmacy and having this melody just sort of burrow its way into your subconscious and then come out. So it's a scary thing to be. It's a scary place to be in. It's the world of songwriting got a whole lot scarier for me in the past couple weeks.
That idea we were talking about there too, where, you know, almost feels like you're grabbing them out of the air. Is that a similar thing creatively when you're drawing or when you're writing scripts, or is that exclusive to music?
It feels more exclusive to music, but actually when I sit down to draw, it's almost like you see the shapes. Sometimes when I'm drawing, it's almost like I see the shapes before me when I'm almost following the line, this invisible line on the page. And that's really weird too. There's something really almost spooky about that. So I think with drawing, it can definitely be the case where it's almost like, you know, the idea of automatic writing or something where you're channeling some spirit realm. But with drawing cartoons, I mean, there is something vaguely similar. I don't actually think I'm receiving cartoons from the other side, but
the DMT-elves. They're sending you the cartoons.
The DMT elves who are graciously, and yeah, I'm grateful to those little guys. But with writing, I feel like it's more concrete, and that's why writing for me. It definitely has more of like I don't know, is it the left side of the brain where it feels more, everything's more logical. Like I have an idea, I maybe write a note in my notes app. Oh, this would be a funny situation. This would be a nice piece of dialogue or a line that a character might say. And so it feels more grounded. Whereas drawing and songwriting definitely feels like I give myself up a little bit to the unknown.
When was the last day you didn't create something?
I've been in a lull, I'll be honest. I wrote 2 songs a couple months ago. I started sort of writing a song yesterday, but I've been in this weird sort of depressed lull. I think every time an album comes out, it's like I get a little depressed because it's out.
Post-release depression.
Yeah, truly. So I feel I've not been very productive, which is, I need to get back to it, but I also needed a little sabbatical, I guess. But I've been writing, I was writing some like short stories and stuff. I was doing a lot of that, and I was just been sketching. You know, I'm always just drawing idly, sort of waiting to find the inspiration for the next book that I do. But I have not been as creative as I'd like to be. So I need to not be too hard on myself about that, but I am feeling a little bit like I'm just drawing air without kind of contributing to the greater good.
Can you feel fulfilled without creating in your life?
No. Deeply no. Deep no.
Is that something you saw in your life before you started creating?
I don't want to, self-mythologize here, but drawing was my first love, and it was something I was always doing as long as I could remember as a kid, So I do feel like that's a big part of my identity is that side of expression, creative expression. And so I feel as though it's pretty intrinsically linked to who I am as a person now. So I think if there was a time when I wasn't drawing or writing or making songs, I would feel like something really bad had happened. Something really wrong had happened. It's terrifying to think about.
I think that's an insightful note to wrap us up on, man. If slightly in the same way we were talking about how Gore is kind of like the ellipsis leading on to the next record, there's a darkness to that end note too that I think carries on in a similar way.
Yeah, always end dark. That's sort of that's what my mom taught me.